Tuti raises to 2.5x, and here Stefan 3-bets not 4, not 5, but 6 times Tuti's raise size. These kind of plays at a high level are a large part of where you can get your edge, just by putting people into spots that you've studied and they haven't. What's up? This is Uri for Guerrilla Poker. I'm gonna start covering the TUTI88 versus Stefan11222 high stakes heads up match. For those of you who don't know, Stefan, who's one of the top players in the world these days, had a long heads up match against a guy called Limitless. This is the graph of the result of the match, where Stefan made something like $600,000. Who knows if these guys were cross-booking or had side bets, but very, very convincing victory for Stefan. And he is now playing TUTI88. I don't think I've played against him personally, but he's been around probably longer than I have playing online, moving up the stakes. Cool thing about covering these kind of heads up matches, you get to see all sorts of interesting plays, and I'll try to walk you guys through them so you understand what's going on in the mind of these world-class poker players when they make plays that seem sometimes completely crazy. Since this is probably going to be a while, if you guys like this, maybe I make this into a series of videos covering hands. Okay, so this hand starts 147 deep. Always talking about effective stack sizes when we talk about stack depth. The fact that Stefan is even deeper doesn't really affect the strategy of the hand. Tuti raises to 2.5x, and here Stefan 3-bets not 4, not 5, but 6 times Tuti's raise size. And this is a good point to start talking about theory, because as you're deeper, should you 3-bet bigger? Theory actually says no. Theory says you should 3-bet smaller when you're deeper. So Stefan is doing something that he actually likes to do a lot, which is he's taking incorrect theory lines, but lines that put his opponents into spots that they're not familiar with. By going 6x, Stefan concedes a bit of theoretical EV, but he puts Tuti in a spot that Tuti, he doesn't have ranges for. He doesn't have pre-flop ranges. He hasn't studied how ranges play post-flop. All the thresholds for everything you do is different. These kind of plays at a high level are a large part of where you can get your edge, just by putting people into spots that you've studied and they haven't. So 3-bet gets called, we get Jack 8-5 rainbow board, and Stefan bets 1/3 pot, indicating that he's probably betting his entire range or close to it, so we expect a very depolarized betting structure here, including hands like pocket 9s, a pair of 5s, pair of 8s, ace king, etc. Turns the 10 of diamonds. Here Stefan bets 1/4 of the pot size. What does this kind of bet size mean when you're out of position? Looking from the side, it seems crazy, right? Like, well, what are you doing betting 1/4 of the pot size? Generally, when you're out of position on the turn, very often you want to split up your range into 2 kind of bet sizes. So one bet size would be for hands that are just going for stacks. Let's say you have something like a straight or pocket 10s, probably pocket kings as well. These hands you bet big. But sometimes you have stuff that's a bit weaker, that, it's ahead, but it doesn't want to go for stacks. A good example here would be something like 10-9, Queen 10, maybe Jack 9 or Queen Jack. So hands that are good enough to bet, but they're not good enough to bet very big. What we've learned from computers is that in these spots you like to have 2 bet sizes, a smaller bet size built around the weaker hands, and you throw in some strong hands to protect. That's at least the theory of what Stefan is doing. Personally, to me this doesn't seem like the greatest spot for it, but like I said, by doing this, he forces Tuti to figure out, what am I raising with for value, what am I bluff raising? And if you're not familiar and you just see the small bet in an unfamiliar spot and you're not sure what's going on, you might make pretty predictable mistakes of, for example, not knowing what to bluff raise with. So Stefan bets 1200, Tuti makes a small raise, Stefan calls, we get the Queen of Diamonds river, and Stefan donk shoves the Queen of Diamonds river. Why would he do this? Generally, you want to donk bet on the turn on the river on very equity shifting cards. Cards that change what the nuts is in a very significant way. And the Queen of Diamonds is certainly a card like that, since now Stefan, if he has ace king, he has a nut straight, and 9 is a straight, flush got there. So everything's kind of mixed up. The betting lead does no longer matter as much as it did on the turn. So it makes sense to donk bet in these kind of situations. Were the river something like a deuce of clubs, No donk betting allowed. That would not be part of the strategy. And the players actually both have straights, but I think it's kind of educational to see the hands that they have. So Stefan bet small on the turn with exactly the type of hand I mentioned, where your hand is good enough to put in a bit more money, but not a lot more money, right? So 10-9, 8-9. Like I said, I'm not sure it's the best spot. I'm not sure it's the best hand, but it's a hand that makes sense for this size. And Tuti just raised him with the nuts. Raising with the nuts is, too easy. Would Tuti have figured out the bluff raises? Does he even at this point know the bluff raises? Time will tell. Maybe we'll see over other hands. But potentially Stefan is using this size and the preflop size to trip Tuti up. Okay, so this hand is 129 big blinds deep effectively. Tuti raises 2.2x, and here we have Stefan again with a very large 6x 3-bet. Tuti calls, and we get a Jack 8-9 rainbow board. That, when you're playing heads up, is actually not very good for the 3-better, for the main reason that the caller has all the combinations of Queen 10 offsuit and Jack 10 offsuit in his range. So not surprising to see a check here. Goes check check, turn 3 of spades, Stefan checks, Tuti bets biggish, which is generally what you want to be doing against a good player. You don't want to start betting very weak because the good player's range is protected. He is still checking strong hands. So to start betting, you do need to actually have a good hand, and then it makes sense to have a biggish bet size. We get the river queen for a 4 to a straight. Stefan checks, Tuti overbet shoves, and Stefan calls. Overbet shove on 4 to a straight classically has been the super nut straight, so not a 10 but a king 10. And this is one of those spots where, there's not enough money behind that anyone is folding a 10. But generally, if you have a 10, it's very, very tempting to bet smaller because you want to get called by worse than a 10. So you might bet half pot, you might bet 2/3 pot or pot, but you don't want to necessarily overbet with a 1-card straight that the other player could easily have, because you start narrowing his range down to the point where he's only calling you with chops, and then the extra money you put in is, not money that you're making. But the super nuts, of course, doesn't mind. So Tuti does indeed have the super nuts for a hand that's played in a very normal way. But good to mention that, he did check back an open-ended straight draw on the flop. You don't want to always be betting your draws, so that you do actually have a bit of deception when you check back, and your check back range is not always pocket 5s or ace 8. Stefan shows up with pocket jacks for a flop top set. Got drawn out on his river call is questionable. I'm not going to call it bad, I think it's fine, but I think it's fair to say he's only beating bluffs. If you were a weaker player, I might say, if Tuti's bluffing, would he really overbet bluff? This feels a bit more, value heavy. But if we're talking about properties for calling for Stefan's hand, his hand actually does have good properties. Because for Tuti to be bluffing, generally he's going to have 2 unpaired cards in his hand. So something like King 6 suited, Ace 4 suited. So as long as Stefan has 2 pair or better, he's on blocking bluffs, so definitely a fine bluff catcher in terms of the hand itself. It's not so much about having the set, it's just not having any unpaired cards in your hand. Okay, this hand is 128 deep effective. Stefan raises 2.5x, Tuti 3-bets to a much more normal size for heads up, which is a bit bigger than 4x. And we get an ace 4-8 two-tone board. Tuti starts out with a quarter pot bet, indicating that there is a decent chance he is betting his entire range. For what it's worth, I don't think he gets to bet his entire range in theory on this board, but it's not easy to play back at. That being said, I'm sure Stefan would know how to play back, so it is what it is. Bet small, turn 5 of clubs, and Tuti checks. Stefan's betting big. Why the big size? Because when Tuti checks on the turn, presumably he's checking hands like kings, queens, jacks, maybe some aces. So there is no point for Stefan to bet some middling hand like pocket 9s or king 8. He's only betting very strong hands and bluffs, and when your range looks like that, you want to be betting big. If the board were low, maybe Stefan would want to bet those medium pairs for protection, but the way ranges are set up here, that doesn't make any sense. So Tuti calls, river ace, Tuti checks, Stefan shoves. Decent chance he can shove any ace that he has in his range. And we get a call from Tuti, hands get turned face up with Tuti having trips, which is a very standardly played hand, right? You 3-bet the a7, you make a small bet, on the turn kind of makes sense to check call, you don't need protection and your hand is not gonna barrel for 3 streets, and then, you know, you're always calling trips on the river, no question. So very easy played hand and well played hand by Tuti. And what you see from Stefan is he called flop with 3s. And then on the turn he was like, you know, I think 3s is a nice hand to bluff with. And this makes a lot of sense. When you want Tuti to fold kings through 9s, you don't want to have a king, queen, jack, 10, 9 in your hand. So what are you going to bluff with? Deuces and 3s seem like very natural candidates. Certainly you have 0 showdown value once you got called on a turn, so once you decide to fire the turn, this is probably one of the best hands to fire the river with, and very sharp technical play from Stefan. This hand is 112 deep. Stefan raises 2.5x, Tuti calls, and we get the ace, king, queen rainbow board. Very special board. You guys have to remember always that the higher the board is, the better it is for the raiser. And ace, king, queen is as high as it gets. So this is a board on which Stefan has a really big advantage. And we see him start to take advantage of that with a 2/3 flop bet, relatively big flop bet. Turns the 6 of diamonds and Stefan starts over betting. 1.5x spot on the turn, 9 on the river, and he goes all in. Kind of interesting spot in terms of thresholds again. Like, the interesting thing here is thresholds. Stefan clearly has a ton of nutted hands in his range. He can have, I mean straights, 2 pairs, sets, everything. Something like ace queen is good enough to go all in, ace 9 is good enough to go all in, maybe ace 6 is good enough to go all in, probably it is. Maybe even ace jack is close to good enough to go all in. I would guess probably not. So Stefan has plenty of nutted hands. He has tons of bluffs to choose from with just, for example, any jack, any 10, which you have a lot of in heads up, potentially a triple barrel. So it's a spot where it's kind of a frequency game where Tuti's going to have to make a lot of tough bluff catching decisions. He cannot call only 2 pair or better and call enough. He's going to have to call a bit wider than that. And Stefan has to control his bluffing frequency, and it's kind of a, you know, either both players get the spot right or one gets it wrong. And if the other notices the frequency mistake, let's say Stefan knows Tuti is folding too much, Stefan could start upping his bluffs. Or if Tuti knows that Stefan is bluffing too little, he can start folding too much. And these kind of games are always going on below the surface in a heads-up match, and they're very tough to spot from the side. Sometimes you can see them by someone doing like a really out-of-line call or a really out-of-line bluff, but that's pretty rare. Usually these guys are just playing with frequencies, and sometimes both players are just trying to play correct and not really looking to gain an edge in this specific type of spot. Either way, Stefan shows up with a very predictable hand, just a random jack. Tuti calls with 2 pairs, so again, easy call, and similar to the Queen 9 hand, we see in a big pot, Tuti show up with a hand that's very easy to show up with, and I'm still waiting to see him show up with an actual bluff catcher to prove to me that he's not overfolding. Because if you always show up on the river with a straight or 2 pair, etc., or trips or whatever, just gonna keep bluffing you all day long, because I know that that's not enough. You need to show up with more. Okay, this hand is being played 207 big blinds deep, so actually rarer stack size. Most players have less experience playing this deep. Stefan raises and we get an ace queen 8 two-tone board. Extremely good board for the pre-flop raiser, and we see Stefan take advantage of this by starting out with an overbet. Previously on this match we had the ace king queen rainbow board, which I said was, you know, so many high cards, and there Stefan bet smaller. So you might ask, well, if ace king queen is higher, why not bet really big there? And the answer has to do with ranges, and ace king queen has a jack 10 offsuit straight for both players, and that limits your ability as the pre-flop aggressor to shovel in money. Ace queen 8 has no straight, So in a way, it's an even better board for the pre-flop aggressor in terms of getting your stack in. I'm not saying it's a higher EV board, but it's, you know, your nut hands, your two pairs and your sets are stronger by far than they were on ace king queen. So here Stefan goes with a very sharp 150% bet size. Turn is the queen of clubs, and we see Stefan just not slowing down, just continuing to pile in money. And at this point you have to ask yourself, you bet really big on the flop. What are you betting really big on the turn with? Is this still ace king ace jack? If so, you're going to check back the river, and I'm not sure you would even do that with these hands. Is this a queen? Did you overbet flop with a queen? Probably not. So this becomes a really narrow range for Stefan. Queen's actually a very bad card for him, on which he should slow down quite a lot. Now, of course, he could still have boats, right? Pocket eights, queen eight, ace queen, hands like that, but not too wide of a range for going this big. So overbets turn, Tuti checks the river, Stefan goes 2x pot on the river, repping just a boat pretty much. Just saying, I have a boat, what are you gonna do about it? Are you gonna call me down with trips when I'm putting in this much money and I know you can easily have trips? And Tuti's answer is, boat? I mean, I have a boat too. I have queen 4. And this hand in a way continues the line of Tuti just showing up with the super nuts in really big pots and Stefan showing up with bluffs. Now, I was talking about how there are these frequency battles of do you bluff too much, do you call too much, etc. And we can't know from the sidelines what's going on. And we're only covering the really big pots, like there are lots of pots where a player folded earlier that are not being covered in these videos. Seeing this and seeing the previous hands, I'm seeing Stefan bluff all the time. We're seeing Tuti catch him all the time. But if you guys will notice, Stefan has more chips than Tuti here. So potentially Stefan is just firing away because he doesn't see Tuti making the hero calls. Personally, I would give Tuti more credit than that, and we will be patient and wait to see Tuti show up with some out of line screw you call, telling Stefan he doesn't believe him and not, you know, just calling boats and trips, etc. Okay, here we have a hand that is 100 big blinds deep. Stefan raises to 250, Tuti calls. We have a jack 4 deuce two-tone board, relatively good board for Stefan. A lot of players would bet their entire range here, but Stefan chooses to check back. What this means in terms of how he's playing is he's decided to play a polarized strategy. Check back range is very often kind of face up, you know, 10s, 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s, 5s, and some frequency, some deuce X, some 4x, plenty of ace highs. And you have the tricky hands. You do want to check back some jacks sometimes, some straight draws, some flush draws, like you need to be a bit tricky there. So check, check, queen of diamonds on the turn, Tuti leads out, presumably has a jack or better for value, plus all the draws. We get the 3 of diamonds river, Tuti bets 25% pot. In terms of hand strength, what would bet 66% on the turn and then 25% on the river? I guess a jack would make sense for that, where after getting called on the turn you're not comfortable enough piling in money, so some kind of jack. Stefan raises him huge, like 13 times his raise. Tuti shoves, Stefan calls. Now you have to keep in mind the action here. So Stefan raising huge, presumably improved on the river 3. So ace 5, 5, 6, pocket 3s, some 2-pair with a 3. I don't know if a 2-pair with a 3 would raise this big. Tuti going all in is basically saying, you know, against this range of pocket 3s, ace 5, 5, 6, maybe 2 pairs, but not sure. I'm strong enough to shove, so Tuti's saying, you know, I probably have 5, 6, maybe ace 5, but probably 5, 6. You have to ask yourself, is Tuti gonna have bluffs here? Is Stefan gonna have for the raise? Maybe, but for the call, obviously not. And when we look at the hands, we see Tuti with 6-5 and Stefan with pocket 3s. So Tuti shows up with a hand you would expect him to show up with. Stefan with a pocket 3s. Raise makes sense. I don't know if this is the best size. Maybe it's a bit too big given all the straights out there. Calling the all-in, you're getting good pot odds, but you have to think of your range for raising. If your range is 3s, ace 5, 5, 6, 3s should be folding sometimes at least. So hopefully Stefan is sometimes folding, but you know, maybe not. Maybe not, who knows. Given the match with Limitless and the way his red line looked, might not be doing too much folding of sets. Okay, that's it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did and want to see more recaps like these, please let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you haven't, check out the Guerrilla Poker website. We have a course about how to improve your red line. We have GTO preflop ranges for 6max NL100, NL2000. We have ones for a live play environment if you guys are going to Vegas this year. So check it out, and I will see you guys next time.